Another possible cover-up from the Chinese Communist Party. Shockwaves from a massive explosion reportedly leveled houses in China. Authorities claim there were no casualties, but residents say otherwise. Beijing works to quiet talk of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Hong Kong police raid the premises of a closed museum dedicated to honoring the massacre's victims. A Chinese man is sentenced to prison by a U.S. court for smuggling submarine technology from the U.S. to China. Chinese regulators are now clamping down on foreign brands. This time, it's winter jacket manufacturer Canada Goose hit with a $70,000 fine. And the online gaming industry also takes a hit. No new online games have been granted approval in China as authorities take aim at the sector. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A massive explosion erupted in China's Henan province. The resulting mushroom cloud reached many stories high. The blast's shockwave leveled houses. But Chinese authorities claim there are no casualties. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Chinese authorities are accused of trying to cover up casualty numbers from a massive factory explosion in July. The incident occurred at an aluminum factory in China's Henan province. Online videos show the explosion reaching a height of about a dozen stories. The blast could be heard miles away, and the ensuing shockwave knocked over nearby houses. Chinese authorities claim there are no casualties resulting from the massive explosion, but a local to the area say at least 5 or 6 people died. We've distorted her voice to protect her identity.
The shockwave from the explosion was very powerful. It knocked over people's houses. It crushed 5-6 people. Right now, the government doesn't allow any mention of the explosion. They want us to say it was because of the floods.
The foundation of Miss Liu's house became loose in the explosion. She said living in the house was dangerous.
The house is dangerous. Parts of our house have already been cracked. The crack is wide. The foundations have been moved. The township government found a third-party company to appraise the damage. The appraisal should be complete, but the compensation is not enough. We can't buy a single door or window with the compensation money they have paid us.
Ms. Liu says that as of Friday, all residents were asked to leave her village. She suspects the authorities did not want the villagers to report the situation to investigative groups.
When this investigation team came to our village, maybe some people went to the investigation team to report that nobody cares about victims of the disaster. 2 or 3 days after that happened, all our villagers were asked to leave. The notice stated that they were not allowed to go home before the 15th.
Another local from the same village says more than 20 people were injured from the explosion. Don Ma, NTD News.
Hong Kong police on Thursday raided the premises of a closed museum. That museum is dedicated to victims of China's 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, when the regime brutally clamped down on pro-democracy protesters. Olivia Chan reports.
This is the moment Hong Kong police raided the premises of the closed museum dedicated to the victims of China's 1989 Tiananmen crackdown on Thursday. Officers were seen loading a truck with display boards, including one with the June 4th Museum's logo and another carrying a picture of a lit candle. The reason for the raid was unclear. Police did not immediately reply to a request for comment. The museum opened a decade ago. It was closed on June 2nd due to a licensing investigation and reopened online as 8964 Museum. The raid came hours after a dozen pro-democracy activists pleaded guilty of knowingly participating in an unauthorized assembly during last year's June 4th anniversary. Rallies were banned by police citing coronavirus concerns. This year's vigil was banned for similar reasons. Hong Kong traditionally holds the largest commemoration for the victims of the Tiananmen crackdown, because mainland China bans such gatherings and heavily censors the topic. On Wednesday, police arrested the vice chairwoman Chow Hang-tung and 3 other members of the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements in China for failing to comply with national security law requirements. The group ran the museum and organizes annual June 4th rallies. Hong Kong authorities have repeatedly denied curbing human rights and freedoms in the city and say law enforcement has made arrests based on evidence.
It looks like Chinese regulators are finding any excuse to clamp down on foreign brands in China. The Chinese branch of winter jacket manufacturer Canada Goose was fined $70,000. Shanghai's market regulator alleged that they used duck feathers instead of goose feathers in their jackets and accused the brand of false advertising. The regulator also alleged that Canada Goose's claim that it uses the warmest Canadian materials in their jacket is untrue. Since the fine, Chinese state-owned media and CCP members from China's Communist Youth League have been hyping up the situation. The Communist Youth League accused the clothing brand of using a basket of lies and wave of falsehoods. State-owned media, the China Economic Daily, praised the market regulator for catching the lying Canada Goose across the Pacific. Tensions between Canada and China have been on the rise. That's after Canadian officials arrested Chinese telecom giant Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou in 2018. A Chinese businessman was sentenced on Wednesday to 2 years in prison for illegally exporting marine technology from the U.S. to China. Marine biologist Qing Shuren was accused of helping China's military develop submarine technology. He founded a Chinese company that sells specialized tools for studying the ocean. He's admitted to illegally exporting 60 hydrophones to China. Those are underwater listening devices, and they were worth a total of $100,000. Prosecutors also accused him of exporting unmanned service vehicles and robotic boats, and allege he supplied goods with a value of $8 million to Chinese state-controlled entities. But he only admitted to charges related to the hydrophones. Submarine technology is playing a critical role in South China Sea tensions. Let's take a moment to look at the biggest threats America is facing right now: international terrorists, domestic terrorists, or communist China. A former DHS secretary and a former FBI assistant director weigh in.
The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, has been shifting its focus to white supremacists and what they call domestic terrorists under the Biden administration. But former acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf says domestic terrorism is not the top threat to Homeland Security.
And talking about the lethality, just if you count the number of attacks over a 2-year period, talking about the lethality of that, and folks have blown that out of proportion. And I've even seen unfortunately, the President Biden talk about how white extremists, domestic terrorism is the most serious threat facing the United States, and that's simply not true, not accurate.
Former FBI Assistant Director Chris Swecker agrees and raises the concern that labeling domestic groups as terrorists may infringe on First Amendment rights and turn into a political witch hunt.
That it's very subjective in terms of what is a domestic terrorist organization. And, we can do this with foreign terrorist organizations because First Amendment and other civil liberties don't come into play as much. But when you're talking about, there's a temptation to go after political rhetoric, to use to almost weaponize the criminal justice system against your political enemies.
So what is the biggest threat facing America? Wolf recommends that people read DHS's first annual threat assessment. That came out last year when he was heading the department. It outlines a whole range of threats, and the most serious one, China.
China trying to steal our technology and become dominant economically, stealing all of our technology. Russia, Iran, nuclear powers out there. So when you put it it puts it in a much broader perspective than just the myopic, let's look at domestic terrorism. And to say that domestic terrorism is the greatest threat to our homeland is a gross, false statement.
Given the recent events in Afghanistan, the two former officials also commented on potential security risks posed by Afghan evacuees. Swecker says the risks don't come just from the bad actors that may have entered the U.S. along with the refugees.
If you left family behind, any family whatsoever, you're subject to being extorted. The Chinese do it all the time. Students that come here are not necessarily intelligence agents, but their mom and dad live back in China. So people who come here who have left family behind, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban can get them to do things that they wouldn't necessarily want to do, but they're being extorted and forced to do.
Commenting on the 9/11 anniversary, the two of them say that the U.S. should keep its eye on international terrorism, adding that from a strategic standpoint, it's much, much more significant than the threat of domestic terrorism.
Beijing has suspended approval of all new online games to curb a gaming addiction among young people. This comes amidst a clampdown on a wide range of sectors aiming to strengthen government control.
China has suspended approval for all new online games. That's according to a report in the South China Morning Post on Thursday. It's thought to be part of Beijing's bid to curb gaming addiction among young people. Citing sources with knowledge of the matter, the report said the decision was revealed at a meeting between Chinese authorities and industry giants Tencent and NetEase. Tencent declined to comment. NetEase did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment. China moved in August to ban under-18s from playing video games for more than 3 hours a week. It wants to curb a growing addiction to what it once described as spiritual opium. Chinese gaming and media stocks, including Tencent and NetEase, fell on Thursday, a day after authorities summoned them and other gaming firms to ensure they had implemented new rules for the sector. After the news, Tencent shares shed more than 8%, while NetEase dropped as much as 13%. The tighter gaming regulations come as China conducts a broader crackdown on a wide range of sectors. These include tech, education and property, strengthening government control after years of runaway growth.
Prices in the coal sector grew by over half in the last month compared to last year. Surging raw material prices are driving factory products prices higher.
China's factory gate inflation hit a 13-year high in August, driven by blistering gains for raw materials prices. And despite Beijing's attempts to cool costs, pressure is mounting on manufacturers in the world's second-largest economy. The producer price index rose 9.5% from a year earlier for the month, the fastest pace since 2008. China's economy has recovered strongly from last year's slump, but has been losing steam due to domestic outbreaks and high raw materials prices, as well as tighter property curbs and a campaign to reduce carbon emissions. Commodity prices have been on a tear in recent months, and that's hurting the bottom lines of many mid and downstream factories. China's coal prices hit a record high this week over supply concerns, as major coal regions started fresh rounds of safety checks. Prices in the coal sector grew over 57% in August from a year earlier. Earnings at China's industrial firms have now slowed for 5 straight months. Some economists, though, expect coal and metal prices will likely drop back as construction activity falls amid restrictions on the sector.
French automobile manufacturer Renault is in discussions to end its joint venture in China. The company builds vans with China's state-backed company Brilliance Auto. That's according to a Reuters source. Back in 2017, the two companies set up manufacturing operations in China's northern city of Shenyang with a focus on electric commercial vans. The Chinese market has proved difficult, and the pandemic made it even tougher. Renault stopped its main passenger car business in China last year, but soon started a new project. It announced a hybrid vehicle joint venture with a privately held multinational automotive company. The French company said in a statement that its business with Brilliance was still struggling, despite a transformation plan set out last June. Brilliance's parent company has defaulted on hundreds of millions of dollars of debt, and Chinese regulators have launched an investigation into the company's possible violations of disclosure laws. In a meeting on Thursday, Indonesia and Australia agreed to strengthen security ties. This comes after China imposed a new law in the South China Sea that requires foreign vessels to notify China before entering the region. Australia's foreign minister and defense minister met with their counterparts in Indonesia's capital. In regard to the South China Sea, Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne says the two nations welcome a region that supports a level playing field based on rules and norms to ensure healthy competition rather than competition that risks sliding into instability or conflict. The Indonesian foreign minister says the two sides signed agreements on counter-terrorism, defense, and cybersecurity. They also discussed the possibility of joint military training exercises in Australia, as well as having Indonesian cadets attending Australian academies. This would be a historic first for the two nations. Another move toward military cooperation took place earlier this week. A former Filipino admiral was calling for a joint military exercise with Taiwan and Japan. The message comes as the communist regime continues stepping up aggression in the region, sending even more aircrafts flying through Taiwan's air defense zone. Taiwan has never joined in any military exercises in that region. That's because most countries don't recognize the self-ruled island as its own nation. They never invited Taiwan to join for fear of angering China. In the wake of the Japanese Prime Minister's decision to quit, the nation's lawmakers are preparing to choose a new leader, one who will enforce a tough policy on China. Last week, Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga announced he would not seek a second term. That's amid a steady decline in his approval ratings. The sudden decision has shaken up Japan's party leadership race and likely the national election due soon after. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party in Japan will choose a new leader near the end of September. And the new leader will become Japan's next prime minister. The leading candidates to succeed Suga include two former foreign ministers, Fumio Kishida and Taro Kono. Both of them have endorsed beefing up Japan's defenses, a move in response to China's aggressive military activities around Taiwan and Japan's southern islands. And some other candidates, Sanai Takachi, a former Internal Affairs and Communications Minister. She would become the first female prime minister in Japan, if successful. A former Defense Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, and lastly, Saiko Noda, a former Internal Affairs Minister. Whoever's at the helm, Japan's new administration is set to face difficult challenges, in no small part from Beijing. A rights group filed a complaint to German prosecutors this week, alleging that several fashion retailers may have profited from forced labor in China's cotton industry. The European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights accuses German brand Hugo Boss and others of abetting and profiting directly or indirectly from forced labor in the Xinjiang region. The filing aims to convince the Federal Attorney General to open an inquiry that its authors say could hold management of the retailers to account and make customers more aware of abuses in supply chains. Hugo Boss, in a statement, rejects the accusations. The United Nations cites what it says are credible reports that 1 million Muslims held in camps have been put to work in Xinjiang. China holds roughly 20% of the world's cotton market, and 85% of its cotton comes from Xinjiang. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.